The structural collapse happened fast. One moment Marcus Webb was inspecting support beams that had been flagged in the safety report. The next he was buried under metal and stone, his ribs screaming and his radio dead. He remembered thinking this was a stupid way to die. Trapped in wreckage because he'd been too stubborn to wait for the full engineering team before checking compromised infrastructure. Then someone was pulling debris off him, moving pieces that should have required mechanical assistance, and Lyra Nettine's voice was cutting through the pain with professional calm. "Marcus, can you breathe? Don't move, I'm getting you out." He'd wanted to tell her to follow evacuation protocols, to leave him and get herself to safety because the entire section was unstable. But his ribs hurt too much for arguing, and Lyra wasn't listening anyway. She pulled him from the wreckage with strength that shouldn't have been possible from someone her size, supporting his weight as they navigated through corridors filling with dust and emergency lighting. Medical said he'd survived with broken ribs and impressive bruising because someone had gotten him out before secondary collapse buried the entire inspection area. Lyra had filed a safety report noting she'd violated evacuation protocols, but considered the violation justified given successful extraction of trapped personnel. Her supervisor had officially reprimanded her and unofficially bought her dinner. Marcus had tried to thank her properly once he could breathe without whimpering, but Lyra had deflected with technical explanations about leverage and adrenaline responses, treating her choice to stay like it was simple physics rather than something braver and more significant. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now Marcus was back on light duty, his ribs healing slowly, and Lyra was avoiding eye contact whenever he thanked her for saving his life. "The modified duty assignments are on your data pad," she said during their weekly safety coordination meeting, her voice maintaining the professional courtesy she'd perfected over 8 months working together. "Nothing that requires climbing or heavy lifting until medical clears you fully. You filtered these assignments specifically." Marcus looked at the list, all projects that kept him on stable ground, away from anything that might stress healing ribs. "This is you protecting me. This is me following medical recommendations for personnel recovering from structural trauma." But her ears tilted back slightly, and Marcus had learned that meant discomfort or possibly embarrassment. "Lyra, Marcus." She finally met his eyes, and something in her expression made his next words die unspoken. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally exhausted in ways he'd never seen from her before. "The assignments are appropriate for your recovery period. If you have concerns about the project load, we can discuss alternatives." "I don't have concerns about the load. I have questions about why you're treating me differently than before the collapse. Because you were nearly killed 3 weeks ago, and I'd prefer not to repeat that experience." She said it flatly, like stating an obvious fact, but Marcus heard something underneath, genuine fear that she was trying to disguise as practical risk assessment. "You saved my life. You know that, right? I'd be dead if you'd followed protocols and evacuated." "I'm aware." The official reprimand was quite clear on that point. She stood, gathering her data pads with movements that suggested their meeting was ending whether Marcus agreed or not. "Your next safety briefing is Thursday. Try not to inspect anything that might collapse before then." She left before he could respond, and Marcus sat alone in the conference room wondering what exactly had shifted between them during those moments when she'd been pulling him from wreckage instead of saving herself. Over the following days, Marcus noticed things he'd been too oblivious to see before. Lyra brought him coffee during morning briefings, always prepared the way he preferred despite never discussing his preferences. She scheduled safety meetings during times that didn't conflict with his project deadlines, which required her to track his entire work schedule. She remembered stories he'd told weeks ago about his sister's wedding, his frustration with colonial administration, his opinion on Kestran architecture, and referenced them in conversation like she'd been cataloging details about his life. These weren't the behaviors of someone being professionally courteous. These were the behaviors of someone who'd been paying attention to him specifically, deliberately, in ways that went far beyond workplace necessity. Marcus started returning that attention, bringing her food during her characteristically long safety audits, asking questions about Kestran culture that exceeded polite curiosity, noticing when she was tired from double shifts, and suggesting she delegate more tasks to her team. They developed an unspoken intimacy built on small gestures and careful consideration, dancing around acknowledgement of what was growing between them. But Lyra maintained careful distance despite the obvious connection. She never quite let their relationship become explicitly personal, never crossed the invisible line between professional courtesy and genuine friendship. When Marcus finally asked her directly if she was deliberately avoiding something between them, Lyra's response was quiet but honest. Yes, why? She was silent for a long moment, her long ears tilted in ways Marcus had learned meant internal conflict. Because acknowledging what's developing would be futile, and I've spent my life avoiding futile endeavors. What's futile about? Marcus, I'm Kestran, you're human. The gap between our biologies isn't something personal connection can bridge. She met his eyes, and he saw genuine pain there. I've been avoiding acknowledging feelings that can't lead anywhere meaningful because doing so seemed kinder to both of us. I don't understand what biology has to do with. I know you don't. She stood, retreating behind professional composure. And explaining would require conversations I'm not prepared to have. Please accept that some barriers exist for good reasons, even if those reasons aren't immediately apparent. She left Marcus sitting alone again, frustrated and confused about what barrier she'd constructed between them and why physical differences mattered more than the connection they'd clearly developed. But he was an engineer. Engineers solved problems by understanding their fundamental structure. And if Lyra believed biology created an insurmountable barrier, Marcus needed to understand exactly what she meant and whether she was right. Marcus researched Kestran biology with the same methodical approach he applied to structural engineering, comprehensive, detailed, and thorough enough that his search history probably looked concerning to station security. What he learned was simultaneously enlightening and inadequate for understanding what Lyra had actually meant about unbridgeable gaps. Kestran physiology was different from human in documented ways. Their metabolism processed nutrients differently, their sleep cycles operated on different rhythms, their sensory perception emphasized hearing and touch over visual processing. But these were technical differences, the kind that required accommodation rather than preventing connection. What Marcus couldn't find in any official documentation was information about Kestran approaches to intimacy, romantic bonding, or the physical aspects of relationships that Lyra seemed to believe created fundamental incompatibility. He tried asking carefully neutral questions to Kestran colleagues, but received responses that were either vague or confused about why a human would care about such personal cultural matters. Apparently asking about intimate biology wasn't appropriate workplace conversation, regardless of species. So Marcus did what engineers do when official documentation fails. He went directly to the source. He found Lyra in the observation lounge late one evening, reviewing safety reports while the station orbited Kestris 4 in peaceful silence. She looked exhausted, not physically tired, but emotionally drained in ways that suggested she'd been carrying heavy thoughts for too long. "We need to talk," Marcus said, settling into the seat across from her. "About what you meant regarding biology and unbridgeable gaps. Marcus, I don't think... I've spent 2 weeks trying to understand what you meant through research and careful questioning. I've learned that Kestran metabolism requires different nutritional supplements, and that your hearing range exceeds human capability by approximately 40%. What I haven't learned is what any of that has to do with whether we can have a meaningful relationship." He leaned forward. "So please explain it to me directly, because I'm tired of guessing." Lyra set down her datapad with careful precision, her ears pressed flat against her head in obvious discomfort. "This isn't a conversation I wanted to have. I know. But we're having it anyway, because you've decided biology creates a barrier, and I need to understand what that actually means." She was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus waited with the patience he'd learned through years of coaxing failing systems back to functionality. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice carrying exhaustion. "Kestran physiology is different from human in ways that matter for intimate relationships. We don't experience physical desire the same way humans do. Our biology operates on different principles, different needs, different responses." She met his eyes with visible difficulty. "I've watched human relationships, studied human attraction, and understood with painful clarity that I can't offer what human women can. the physical compatibility, the biological responses, the intimacy that humans seem to consider essential to romantic connection. You think I need you to be biologically human. I think you deserve someone whose body responds to intimacy the way yours does. Someone who can offer physical compatibility alongside emotional connection. Her voice was steady, but Marcus heard the pain underneath. I care about you, Marcus. I've cared for months, maybe longer. But caring isn't enough when my body can't respond the way yours would expect or need. That's the unbridgeable gap, not culture or custom, but fundamental biological incompatibility. Marcus processed this carefully, understanding now what Lyra had been carrying. Can I ask you something? If you must. Do you think I'm only capable of valuing physical compatibility? That biological responses are all that matter in human relationships. Lyra hesitated. I don't know what humans value most. I only know that my biology can't provide something that seems universally important in human relationships. That makes me inadequate regardless of emotional connection. You're right about one thing, Marcus said quietly. Your biology is different. You're absolutely correct about that. He leaned forward. But you're completely wrong that it matters more than who you are. Marcus, you stayed during the collapse when protocols demanded evacuation. You pulled me from wreckage instead of saving yourself. You've spent months demonstrating care through small gestures you thought I wouldn't notice. You remember details about my life, protect me from my own stubborn disregard for safety. Bring me coffee prepared exactly how I prefer it despite never asking my preferences. He met her eyes. Those are choices, Lyra. Choices about how you treat someone you care about, and those choices matter infinitely more than whether your biology matches mine perfectly. But physical intimacy matters, yes, but it's not the foundation of connection. It's one expression of it, not the requirement for it. Marcus reached across the table, offering his hand. What makes relationships meaningful isn't biological compatibility. It's emotional trust, consistent presence. The courage to stay beside someone even when leaving would be easier or safer. You've demonstrated all of those things. That's what I value most, not hypothetical physical responses, but actual demonstrated character. Lyra stared at his offered hand like it represented something dangerous and impossible. You're saying biology doesn't matter. I'm saying it matters less than who you are. And who you are is someone loyal enough to violate safety protocols to save someone's life. Courageous enough to care about someone despite believing that caring is futile, and genuine enough to admit your fears instead of hiding behind professional distance. He kept his hand extended. If you're asking whether I can value you despite biological differences, the answer is I already do. I've been valuing you exactly as you are without needing you to be something else. I don't know how to believe that. Then let me prove it. Give me a chance to show you that what we have matters more than what biology we possess. His voice softened. Please, Lyra, trust me enough to try. She looked at his hand for a long moment, her ears tilting forward slightly. Hope, Marcus had learned, or the beginning of trust. Then, carefully, she took his hand. Her grip was warm and certain despite the uncertainty in her eyes. I want to try. I want to believe that loyalty and courage and care matter more than biological similarity. But I'm scared of being inadequate. You're not inadequate. You're exactly what I want. Someone brave enough to stay, loyal enough to protect, honest enough to admit fear instead of pretending confidence. That's more than enough. That's everything. They sat together in the observation lounge, hands clasped across the table, beginning something built on trust and honesty rather than biological compatibility. And for the first time since the collapse, Lyra's expression held hope instead of resignation. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Lyra built their relationship on a foundation neither had expected. Emotional intimacy first, physical affection as something they navigated carefully rather than assumed would work automatically. They talked more than Marcus had talked with anyone in years. About fears and hopes, about what caring meant to each of their species, about how to build connection when biology didn't provide a roadmap. Lyra admitted that Kestran relationships operated differently than human ones. Physical intimacy existed, but wasn't the central focus that human culture seemed to make it. Kestran bonding emphasized emotional trust, consistent presence, shared purpose. Things that humans valued too, but often treated as secondary to physical compatibility. We don't feel desire the way humans describe it. She explained one evening in Marcus's quarters, where they'd started spending time together away from professional contexts. Our biology doesn't create the same urges or responses, but we feel connection deeply. The desire to be near someone, to protect them, to share experiences with them, that's what matters most to my people. And you thought I wouldn't value that because it's different from human biology? I thought you'd consider it inadequate, that I'd be less than what you need. She sat beside him on the small couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. Humans seem to place such emphasis on physical intimacy. I couldn't offer what human women could in that regard. What you offer is loyalty that made you stay in a collapsing building instead of following evacuation protocols. Courage to care about someone despite believing that caring couldn't lead anywhere. Honesty about your fears instead of pretending confidence. Marcus took her hand, still fascinated by the slight differences in how her fingers moved. Those are things no biology guarantees, human or otherwise. Those are choices you make constantly. And those choices matter infinitely more than whether your body responds to touch exactly like a human's would. But physical affection still matters to you. Of course it does, but we can figure out what works for both of us rather than assuming human defaults apply universally. He squeezed her hand gently. Have you noticed that what we're doing right now, sitting together, talking honestly, touching in ways that feel comfortable to both of us, this is physical affection? Just expressed differently than stereotypical human intimacy. Lyra looked at their joined hands, at how close they were sitting, at the comfortable intimacy they'd built over weeks of careful trust. I've been so focused on what I can't offer that I didn't notice what we've already been building. Exactly. You assumed I needed something specific because that's what human culture emphasizes publicly. But what I actually need is someone who chooses to be present, who cares enough to demonstrate that care consistently, who's brave enough to be vulnerable. He met her eyes. You're all of those things. That makes you more than adequate. That makes you exactly what I want. They navigated physical affection carefully over the following weeks, learning what touch felt comfortable to Lyra's different sensory processing, discovering that some forms of intimacy worked better than others, building something that belonged to them specifically rather than following templates from either culture. It wasn't perfect or automatic, but it was genuine, and that mattered more than biological compatibility ever could. One evening, after they'd been officially together for nearly 2 months, Lyra asked the question Marcus had been waiting for. What made you so certain my biology didn't matter, before you knew me well enough to see past it? Marcus thought carefully about his answer. I'd spent 8 months watching you demonstrate character that transcended physical form. I knew you were brilliant, dedicated, fiercely protective of people you cared about. I knew you stayed calm during emergencies, remembered details most people overlooked, and brought me coffee without making it obvious you were taking care of me. He smiled. I knew who you were before biology became a question, and knowing who you were made biological differences feel trivial by comparison. Most humans wouldn't feel that way. Most humans don't spend months working beside someone who saves their life through courage and determination. I had context that made biology feel less important than character. He pulled her closer, and she settled against him with the comfort of someone who'd learned this closeness was safe. You possess qualities that matter more than physical form: unshakable loyalty, courage to stay when others would leave, choice to care despite believing that caring was futile. Those things built something real between us. Biology just had to catch up and figure out how to express what already existed. Lyra was quiet for a moment, and Marcus felt her arms tighten around him slightly. I spent months believing I could never be enough for you, that my biology made me inadequate regardless of how much I cared. Carrying that weight was exhausting. I know, but you don't have to carry it anymore. You're enough, more than enough. You're exactly what I want, biology and all. She looked up at him, her gray eyes holding vulnerability and growing confidence. You have 2 things most people never find in any relationship, regardless of biology. What's that? Someone who chooses you deliberately, knowing exactly who you are, and someone brave enough to stay beside you even when fear says leaving would be safer. She smiled. Those aren't guaranteed by biology, human or otherwise. Those are rare gifts that make everything else feel secondary. Marcus kissed her forehead gently. I could say the same about you. You've given me loyalty I didn't know I needed and courage that makes me braver just by being near it. That matters infinitely more than whether our biology matches perfectly. They sat together in comfortable silence, building something real on a foundation of trust and deliberate choice. Outside Marcus's quarters, the station continued its orbit around Kestrus 4. Inside, two people from different worlds proved that connection didn't require biological similarity, just honest communication, consistent care, and courage to value someone for who they were rather than what species they happened to be. Some relationships were built on physical compatibility that came easily and automatically. But the ones that lasted, the ones that became something profound, were built on choice, trust, and the courage to see someone clearly and choose them anyway. Lyra possessed qualities no biology could guarantee. Loyalty fierce enough to defy safety protocols, courage deep enough to admit fear rather than hide behind competence, honesty brave enough to reveal vulnerability instead of maintaining defensive distance. Those qualities built something between them that transcended physical form, creating connection that mattered more than any biological compatibility. She'd asked if she could be enough despite her differences. Marcus's answer, demonstrated through consistent presence and deliberate care, was that she'd always been enough. Her biology didn't make her inadequate, it just made her Lyra, which was exactly what he wanted. And as they sat together building intimacy one careful moment at a time, both understood that what they possessed was rare and valuable. Connection that didn't depend on biology providing easy answers, but on two people choosing each other deliberately and building something real through trust, honesty, and courage to value what actually mattered. Biology might differ between species, but character, loyalty, and courage, those transcended any physical form. Those were what built relationships that lasted. 3 months into their relationship, Marcus noticed Lyra had stopped apologizing for her biology. She no longer prefaced physical affection with disclaimers about how her responses might differ from human expectations. She didn't treat herself as inadequate anymore. Instead, she approached their relationship with confidence built on demonstrated trust rather than fear of biological incompatibility. They developed their own language of intimacy, one that honored both their biologies rather than expecting one to conform to the other's template. Lyra learned what touch Marcus found comforting versus overwhelming. Marcus learned that Lyra experienced physical closeness through different sensory processing, that what felt intimate to her sometimes looked different from stereotypical human affection, but mattered just as much. "You were right," she told him one evening while they worked together in his quarters, reviewing safety reports side by side in comfortable proximity. "About biology mattering less than character. I spent so much time focused on what I couldn't offer that I missed what we were actually building." Which was partnership, trust, the kind of connection that doesn't depend on physical responses matching perfectly because the emotional foundation is solid enough to support whatever physical intimacy we figure out together. She leaned against him, her weight comfortable and familiar. "I was terrified you'd find me inadequate. Instead, you found me exactly right. Because you are exactly right, biology and all." Marcus put down his datapad to focus on her fully. "Have you noticed that the biological differences I was supposedly going to find insurmountable, I barely think about them anymore. They're just part of who you are, like your tendency to overwork yourself or your habit of bringing me coffee without being asked. Those aren't equivalent traits, aren't they? They're all just aspects of Lyra, some biological, some behavioral, all part of the complete person I chose to be with." He smiled. "I don't separate you into biological parts I accept and character parts I value. You're a whole person. I value all of it." Lyra was quiet for a moment, her ears tilted in contemplation. "What made you able to see past biology to who I actually am? Most humans seem so focused on physical compatibility that everything else becomes secondary. I think most humans would surprise you if given the context I had. I spent months watching you demonstrate character before biology became a question. I knew you were loyal. You stayed during the collapse when protocols said to leave. I knew you were courageous. You cared about me despite believing that caring couldn't lead anywhere. I knew you were honest. You admitted fear instead of hiding behind professional distance." He took her hand. "Those qualities built respect and trust, and eventually love. By the time biology became relevant, I already knew you were exactly what I wanted. The physical details just had to figure out how to express what already existed emotionally. You make it sound simple. The principle is simple: value character over biology. The execution takes work and communication and willingness to figure things out together. He squeezed her hand gently. But you've demonstrated every quality that actually matters in a partner. Everything else is just details we navigate together. Later that evening, as they prepared for sleep, Lyra had started staying over regularly, her presence in his quarters feeling natural rather than remarkable. She asked one more question. What would you tell other humans who struggle with cross-species relationships, who focus so heavily on biological compatibility that they miss everything else that matters? Marcus thought carefully. I'd tell them that biology can be different without being incompatible. That physical intimacy takes many forms, and assuming human defaults are universal is short-sighted. But mostly, I'd tell them to pay attention to character first, to qualities like loyalty, courage, honesty, consistent care. Those are the things that build real connection. Those are the things no biology can guarantee, but that make all the difference. Those are the things I was afraid weren't enough. They're not just enough, they're everything. Physical compatibility matters, yes, but it's downstream from emotional trust. It's the expression of connection, not the foundation of it. He pulled her close. You built the foundation through months of demonstrated care. Everything physical we've figured out together has been easy because that foundation was solid. Lyra settled against him with the comfort of someone who no longer questioned whether she belonged there. Thank you for seeing past my biology to who I actually am, for valuing loyalty and courage more than physical similarity, for choosing me despite every reason biology gave you not to. Thank you for staying during the collapse when you should have evacuated, for demonstrating that courage and loyalty were more than abstract concepts, they were choices you made consistently, for being exactly who you are, biology and all. He kissed her forehead gently. You were worried you couldn't be enough because your body is different, but you've always been enough, more than enough. You're exactly what I want. They fell asleep together, two people from different worlds who'd built something real on a foundation of character rather than biological similarity. Outside, the station continued its eternal orbit. Inside, they'd proven that connection